Welcome modelers. This is our El Jefe build. It's a 2005 Chrysler 300C. The model kit is from AMT and it's in 1/25th scale. This is the 5.7 liter Hemi that comes with the model kit. It's pretty simple. The interior seats have some complex curves to them, and when you go to put them together, you have to pinch them so you can fuse these curves to one another. The gauge panel that comes with the kit is very accurate, but it is very difficult to paint. After comparing the two silvers I had, I felt the X11 chrome silver was a better match for the real car. To avoid issues with the body after it's painted, I like to put it together as much as possible. This kit did not give me any issues with slipping the chassis into the body with the bumpers already installed. I will say the wheel tubs on the front did need some shaving, as you can tell from the photo. One of my techniques for prepping parts for paint is using scuff pads. I like to use the ultra-fine or the gray colored pads because they are a finer grit. You can find them at any auto parts store in the paint section. Okay, enough of the secret techniques. Let's get on to painting. Here are all of my parts prepped for paint. I used a squeeze tube of Master's Touch black acrylic with my homebrew thinner, and it's just shot with a battery operated airbrush. There's nothing special here. I then used a silver paint pen to bring out some of the details on the engine cover. The dashboard required a small brush and Tamiya silver. I then filled in the details with black paint, the same I used on the chassis. To match the interior of the real car, I had to mix up some acrylic paints. I used my homebrew thinner, and when the paint is thinned properly, it airbrushes and comes out very well. I paint the wheel wells on the body black, and then I paint the headliner under the body the color that it would be in the real car. I had a bit of a whoopsie moment here when I spilled my drinking water on top of the paint after I just put it on. No worry though, all you gotta do is wait it out, and that water will dry and it will look just like it did before the water hit it. Just don't touch it. Next for the interior was painting the top of the door cards black so it would match the two-tone style of the real car. In the real car, the steering wheel and the shifter are real wood. So what I had to do was come up with a way to use my acrylic paints to simulate that effect. While that dark bronze was drying on the interior pieces, I went to the body and look, there's no damage to the paint from the water. I used Corel Draw to design the gauges. I then printed them out with my laser printer, cut out the print, and just attached it to the part with some canopy glue. Again, I used a paint marker to pick out some fine details on the chassis. Once the bronze dried on the steering wheel and the shift handle, I used burnt umber with a dry brush method to give a simulated wood grain effect. I'm happy with how it came out. The black on the door cards was just too shiny, so I knocked that gloss down with some Vallejo satin varnish. Oh yeah, it's all coming together. I drilled out the exhaust pipes so they look more realistic. Once the chassis was assembled, I used a silver dry brush method to add some wear to the chassis. With the engine painted, it was time to put it together. The problem being, the engine cover wouldn't sit flat on the engine. So when it was installed in the car, the engine cover was lopsided. It didn't look right. The problem was the EGR pipe or the EGR valve that the kit puts under the cover. For whatever reason, the cover doesn't nest on top of it, it doesn't sit flat, whatever. It's a problem. and I had to think my way out of this problem. So what could I do? Let's just cut it apart and glue just a small piece of that pipe on the cover and hope that it lines up to the other parts. When you put the interior tub on the chassis, you can see the bottom of the tub through the transmission tunnel. There's a hole there. So that meant I had to take it apart again and paint that part of the interior tub black, so there's not this white box under the chassis if you were to look at it. To make the engine fit in the chassis better, I had to shave the transmission reinforcements that were on the oil pan. Coming back to the EGR valve, the air box wasn't close enough to it. There was a gap. What could I do? Could I trim the hose of the air box so I could move it a little closer and everything would just fall into place? Maybe. I also ended up drilling a tiny hole in the air box so the EGR hose would slip into it. Now that is a nice recovery. I needed to do something to add a little more realism to this engine bay. You can't see the spark plug wires, so I decided to put in an oil dipstick. I fashioned one from a spare smoke canister and a piece of music wire. In hindsight, it was probably easier to do this with the engine out of the chassis, but oh well. Here's the engine bay with some detail painting done to it. All that's left is the radiator fluid reservoir. So I used a Sharpie to mark up the little rubber hose that's on the reservoir. Then I used Tamiya's clear orange and added like a fluid level of radiator fluid inside the reservoir. What I then did was created a whitewash, and I slathered it all over the sides of this reservoir to look like the Tamiya clear orange was actually radiator fluid being seen through a transparent piece of white plastic. Here's a better shot of the finished interior with the wood grain accents. A bit of a bobble on the spokes on the steering wheel, but that's the best I can do. The real car had chrome mirrors, so I used Molotow to paint the mirrors. We're moving on to the paint shop, and the body is prepped and ready for the silver paint. So I never really airbrushed this Tamiya metallic silver before, but I was happy with the results. I've also never used a Tamiya clear acrylic. It's X22 gloss clear, and I decided to use a test spoon. So I sprayed the Tamiya clear on the test spoon, and it was thinned out, and I was happy with how it looked. So then I moved on to the body, and I had a couple of issues spraying it on, but I think that's more with the airbrush and it being consistent. But I don't know. I'm still new at the airbrushing thing, especially with clean looking bodies. But the results speak for themselves. I think they're passable. Based on a previous YouTube suggestion, I decided to do the panel lines on this body. I used a thinned out black acrylic with a very small brush, and as you can see, the panel lines come out well. Thanks, guys. On the real car, the window sills and the door handles were chrome as well. So what I had to do was tape off the window sills with some small tape that I cut with a ruler, and then run the Molotow pen along those window sills. Taking care at those corners, I just eyeballed those, and I also eyeballed the door handles. The windshield frame is black, and so is the frame under the hood. So I had to take these areas off before I brush them with a Tamiya gloss black. Now that the hood was dry, I had to separate it from the sprue. This is always nerve-wracking for me, especially on a curved piece where you have to match the curve with the knife. Otherwise you get this flat spot when you put the hood on the car, and that drives me nuts. Is there a better way to do this? I don't know. Is there a better way to mold the piece? Probably not. So it is what it is. I'm just going to bitch about it. All hoods should have insulation on them. So what I did here was taped off the area that should have the insulation, and I painted it with some Tamiya NATO Black. With the B-pillars painted gloss black on the body, it was very close to completion. The chrome had yellowed on the door guards, so I decided to recover them with a Molotow pen. And then the pins on the door guards didn't quite fit on the holes on the body, so I had to re-drill those as well. I was worried about the headlight glass fitting onto the body, especially with the chrome backing put on it. It's a complicated curve, but my hat's off to AMT because this part actually came together pretty well. What I did have a fitment issue with are the bumperettes. These are little chrome pieces that fit into the bumper just under the headlights on the Chrysler. I just had to do some shaving on the back side of the bumperette so it would fit into the body. Next, the side view mirrors were installed on the body along with the windshield wipers. Moving to the back of the car, I used canopy glue to install the brake lights. The chrome inserts were installed into the mirror body. I used a product called Tacky. It's the same thing I used to hold the mirrors in place with the toothpicks. I then printed up some license plates, cleared them with a satin varnish from Vallejo that makes the paper print a little tougher so you can glue it on the body and it doesn't get all warped and bendy. That's it for the build. Now it is time for the reveal. If you're not a Dallas Cowboys fan, sorry, don't feel bad, I'm not either. But the person this car was built in tribute to was a huge Cowboys fan.